Hey everyone, and welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving headfirst into, honestly, one of the oldest and most profound mysteries in human history. What actually happens to our consciousness after we die? We've got a fascinating source document to unpack today, and it completely flips traditional dogma on its head. Instead of, relying on fear-based myths, it uses pure logic to map out the soul's journey. So, grab a seat, get comfortable, and let's decode this whole thing together. All right, let's just tackle this massive existential debate right out of the gate. What happens after we die? I mean, for centuries, philosophers, theologians, pretty much everyone has wrestled with this exact question. But our source material today, it strips away all the usual superstition to look at the actual underlying mechanics of consciousness itself. It proposes that the afterlife isn't just some random lottery, but a highly structured, logical progression. But to really understand that progression, we first kind of have to unlearn a few things. Section 1. The myth of rebirth.
So, you've probably heard the popular myth, right? The idea that if you misbehave in this life, your soul gets demoted, basically sent into a cosmic timeout where you cycle through millions of animal forms before you ever get to be human again. Well, our source material argues that this simply defies logic. Why? Because human consciousness has leveled up. We've developed deep intellect, complex intuition, and expanded human consciousness is literally too large, too complex, to just magically shrink backward into an unevolved animal form. Actually, the source uses a really beautiful metaphor for this. It says, a delicate bulbul cannot be caged in an enclosure meant for an ox. Now, the bulbul, which is this small, highly sensitive songbird, represents our refined human consciousness, and the ox enclosure, that's the restrictive, basic vessel of an animal. You simply can't cram the immense psychological depth of a human into a container that just isn't built for it. It completely defies the laws of spiritual physics.
So if we aren't going backward to be punished, how does karmic consequence actually work? That brings us to Section 2. Who really suffers? Okay, get ready, because this is going to completely flip the traditional narrative upside down. The text introduces this concept of dandioni, which translates to the punishment phase, or the realm of suffering. Now, tradition usually says animals live in the dandioni, but the source argues that human life itself is the ultimate dandioni. Yeah, you don't need to be born as an animal to be punished. The human experience is perfectly designed to deliver profound, excruciating suffering all on its own. Let's break down the logic on this one. Think about it. When an animal is hurt, it feels physical pain, sure. But it doesn't lay awake at night plotting revenge, or mourning its lost social status, or agonizing over a shattered ego. Human suffering, wow, we specialize in mental agony, don't we? The sting of insults, existential dread, prolonged anxiety. If an animal feels absolutely no mental humiliation, is being an animal truly a punishment? Not really. The deepest, most intense suffering actually requires the most advanced mind. Therefore, the human realm is the ultimate arena for karmic consequences. So if human life is where we work out our karmic debts, how do we actually end up in our specific circumstances? Let's look at Section 3, How Desires Shape Destiny. The text explains this by comparing our underlying desires to invisible, magnetic weights that we constantly carry around. When a soul leaves the body, it doesn't just, float around randomly. It's literally pulled toward an environment where it can fulfill those very specific cravings. So, if your life was built entirely on greed, your soul is magnetized right into a toxic environment. But if your life was built on virtue, you're drawn upward. In a very real sense, you are the architect of your next reality.
But here's the profound, incredibly hopeful part of all this. We are definitely not helpless slaves to our past. The source points to historical and mythological figures like Jamila, Ganika, and Valmiki. Now, these were individuals with deeply flawed, even criminal pasts. Yet, they dramatically transformed their desires, shifted their consciousness, and completely rewrote their destinies. They proved that desires are really just habits, and habits, they can be broken. The karmic chain can absolutely be cut.
Now, you might be wondering about that old belief, right? The one that says whatever you think about right before you die determines your next life. Well, the text clarifies this beautifully. Yes, powerful, elevated emotions in your final moments can act as a sudden exception, helping a soul cross the ocean of existence. But generally speaking, it's your lifelong habits that build the foundation. You can't just live a toxic life and then expect to cram a pure thought in at the absolute last second. It's your daily thoughts and actions that construct that powerful magnet we were just talking about. So, our internal state dictates our external reality. But how exactly is this enforced? Let's get into Section 4, the invisible laws of karma. The text makes a really vital distinction here. Karma is not some physical prison that strips away your free will. God or nature isn't sitting in some cosmic office keeping a ledger of your sentences. Instead, karma acts more like the invisible spies of nature. You are entirely free to act. The universe's treasury is wide open to everyone equally. But these invisible laws constantly track your choices and deliver the exact, proportional rewards or consequences based on those choices. So free will and absolute justice exist simultaneously.
Think about this phrase from the text. Sourness instantly ruins food in a brass vessel. The universe provides the food, and the food itself is completely neutral. But if you drop something sour into brass, it reacts and turns toxic. In the exact same way, a bitter or toxic mindset takes an ordinary, even pleasant situation and instantly turns it into a personal nightmare. It's not the universe punishing you, it's just a chemical reaction of your own mind.
And this brings us to a really revolutionary conclusion about the afterlife. Heaven and hell, they are not geographical locations you travel to. They are states of mind. The source points out that you could place a coward in a beautiful, lush, peaceful forest, a literal paradise, and within 2 days his mind would create a hellish reality, imagining demons dancing around him at night. Heaven is created by high aspirations and virtues. Hell is forged by low desires, fears, and toxic reactions. Basically, you carry your heaven or your hell with you, wherever you go.
Knowing all this, where is the soul ultimately heading? That brings us to Section 5, the upward journey. The source shares a deeply profound perspective here. It says, the fundamental duty and nature of the soul is evolution. It defines this as a continuous, unstoppable internal effort to move away from inertia, deadness, and unconsciousness and move toward absolute consciousness and perfection. Because this drive is fundamental to the soul's nature, it can only move forward and upward. It literally cannot slide backward down the evolutionary ladder.
And this is where the logic gets truly mind-blowing. The author argues that even deeply flawed actions, like deceit or theft, actually stem from a root drive to overcome inertia. Obviously, it's a clumsy, misguided attempt by the soul to grow, gain power, and become more conscious. But even in bad behavior, the underlying element is evolution. Because of this constant upward pressure, human souls naturally attract a similar or higher human form next time. The push is always toward the light.
Now, the text does address some fascinating exceptions. For instance, what about incredibly smart, intuitive animals? Well, the source says these are lower beings that have spent time in human environments and are slowly evolving upward, preparing to bridge the gap into human consciousness. And what about those rumors of humans being born in lower states? Actually, the text explains that sometimes highly advanced, enlightened souls voluntarily choose to take births in lower, toxic environments, not as a punishment, but as a sacrifice to cleanse that environment and uplift the people there. Isn't that amazing? So, we've journeyed from debunking the myths of animal regression to uncovering the magnetic power of our desires, all the way to the unstoppable upward evolution of the soul. It all comes down to the daily habits of our mind. So I want to leave you with this final, vital question. If our consciousness can only move upward, and your underlying desires are the magnets that will construct your next existence, what thoughts are you using to build your next reality today? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep learning, keep evolving, and I'll catch you next time.